DLA Ignite. With me today, we've got Alex Abbott. And Alex and I are going to be talking about measuring what's important or measuring what matters in sales. Alex has been on a really interesting journey over the last 3 years in terms of looking at cold outreach and measuring it and see what works and what doesn't work. And that's what we're going to really talk about today. So, Alex, where can people find you?
LinkedIn is the best place, but I'm also on Twitter. And I'm also on some other socials. So as the Bearded Sales Guy, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Walking Digital Corridors podcast website, walkingdigitalcorridors.com.
Okay, fantastic. So Alex, just give us a background in terms of the journey that you've been on over the last 3 years, especially around cold outreach, because it's not something that a lot of people really talk about.
For a bit of context, I've spent 23 years in B2B sales, and I would say there's been two halves to that career. The first half really is a sales rep, learning my trade, largely self-taught. The second half as a sales leader, so building sales teams, in some case building businesses within other tech companies. And the one thing that has remained constant throughout that time is the importance of generating my own pipeline, whether that was a rep or whether that was as a sales leader, and never actually giving that responsibility to someone that isn't within my control or my influence. Because that's the one thing that I found that is the leading indicator to achieving your revenue growth objectives or commission or whatever it is that you're working towards. And back in the day, it was all about, I know I need this many opportunities in this many future quarters to give me the confidence that we're going to develop the pipeline that we need to do whatever it was that we were achieving or seeking to achieve. As a rep, it was always 200 to 300% of my number. As a sales leader, that became more realistic as the team size grew. But that was the thing that stayed with me throughout. So when I left Oracle in 2020, 3 years ago now, just over, and set Sapiro up, we started life as a business that was providing sales as a service, lead generation services. And so without going into too much detail, if I could look back at the last 3 years, we've been on this test. So what are the techniques, tips and tricks that will actually develop pipeline most effectively? It comes down to creating conversations. And so for that first year, it was incredibly tough.
And what were you doing in that first year then?
We were cold calling, cold emailing. I was leaning on some of my experience of the previous 23 years to recommend creating a value proposition where we could quantify the commercial value and help clients develop their path to value, and then using that to create pipeline generating initiatives, which would get a lot of interest, a lot of engagement, but very little commercial conversations off the back of it. People were quite willing to consume the content, but they weren't willing to go from that point to commercial conversation. And the reason that is because there's very little relationship, very little trust. And I think companies find that difficult to do today. We as an outsourced company found it even more difficult to do. So at the end of that first year, that was me realizing that we've hit an inflection point. Buyer behavior has changed significantly, yet sales and marketing techniques hadn't. And the more companies, sales and marketing leaders I spoke to, the more I was hearing, we need to do more with less. We just need to make more calls. We need to send more emails. And it was counterintuitive. I decided that the traditional sales and marketing funnel had broken. But when I said that to some people, they thought I was mad.
So you had an epiphany, didn't you, in terms of you had a road to Damascus moment, didn't you?
I did. So reconnected with my old friend, Adam Gray, your business partner, who I worked with at Oracle back in 2014-15, and realized that what you were both doing with your social selling and influence program was the thing that I prided myself on my ability to build relationships with people. And I would encourage that with my team. And that was the lifeblood of pipeline development. And when I realized there was an actual methodology to follow, a process that we could trust, that allowed us to do that at scale digitally. That's when I decided I'm going to put the team through that program, your program, and we're going to invest the time we need to become experts. And that's what we did in the second year. We spent a year becoming experts in social selling.
So give us a comparison in terms of, you spent a year doing cold calling, and what results were you getting? And you've then been now social selling for, what is it, 12 or 24 months? And what results are you getting? So what's the comparison?
Yeah, I mean, it's like night and day. So it depends on whether it's a B2B focused business or a B2C focused business. And it depends slightly on whether it's a volume-based reach versus focused account territories. And just kind of elaborate on, is it a volume play or is it more of a strategic, let's develop meaningful relationships deep and wide in an account? And what we saw is, on average, we went from 1-2 meetings per week each.
Per salesperson, yeah?
Per salesperson, to between 15 to 20 meetings each.
Wow, that's an amazing difference.
Yeah, huge. Like I said, like night and day. I actually had to dial down my prospecting in order to manage other things throughout the week because I was running the business as well.
I know one of the people you had working for you complained that he had 25 meetings in a week, and he couldn't carry on. He was having so many meetings, he couldn't do the prospecting at the same time, which is ironic considering there's so many people that are saying that business development and generation of leads and meetings is so difficult right now.
Yeah. It is difficult for those people that don't know.
So one of the things that you did at the beginning of this year was that you decided to set a whole set of metrics, wasn't it? It's basically run a benchmark. So we're recording this now at the end of October 2023. So you now have 10 months worth of data.
Yeah.
What are you seeing from that data?
I think first off, the reason why we started to create this data is because I'd have many conversations with sales and marketing leaders about social selling, and most people thought they knew what it was, but they didn't really actually know.
Most people think that social selling is when you get spam across social, and that's getting spam across social. It's not social selling.
Yeah, and I found myself having to try and educate people, but the resistance wall was quite high because they'd been there and done it, and someone like me isn't going to tell them otherwise. So I thought, let's actually create the data. Let's have a reference point that we can go to and rely on and say, this is benchmark data based on not only the methodology that we're following, but a range of different experiences, from an SDR with 2 years experience right up to someone like myself with 23 years experience, so that it could act as a very accurate benchmark for any business. And so in the December 2022, we were compiling what we wanted to measure. So the topic of this discussion, measure what matters. Most businesses don't. They're still measuring emails sent and calls made,
rather than meetings generated.
Yeah, and they're measuring meetings generated, but they're not measuring the lead measures, the activities and behaviors that each person need to follow on a weekly basis that increase the likelihood of generating more meetings. And I think most businesses, they're trying to crack the whip harder, do more calls, send more emails in the hope that it will create more meetings, but it's actually having the opposite effect.
Yes, it does. And there's data. There was a whole bunch of data that was created by HubSpot during COVID, where they measured the data right across the whole of their 120,000 customers. And I've got details of this, and we've got it in blogs because I took screenshots. And what it showed was that the more emails you send, the less response you get.
Yeah.
And that's from a data set of 120,000 customers of HubSpot.
We know that. Sales leaders, marketers know that, but they still do it. And it's what was it Einstein said?
The definition of his insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Yeah, that's it.
There's an interesting comment here from Jackie that I just want to pull in, which is that I've seen the transformation the team has been through from frustration to enduring the way they work and using their creativity. So have you seen something take place within the team from where I don't like work to I like work?
Yeah, Absolutely. So Jordan was quite literally banging his head against the brick wall. He had the desire to succeed. He really wanted to do well. He was motivated by money, which a lot of salespeople are. Yet he was constantly doing these activities on a daily basis and getting nowhere near where he needed to. And I have to say, it was affecting his mental health. He wasn't in a good place. And so I'd say the first 3 months was a real eye-opener for him, because he was able to use his creativity. And he's naturally a creative person. So taking the lid off and letting him free was an amazing thing to see. And he's produced some just fantastic stuff, Eminem videos and various other videos.
And he's the guy with the getting 25 meetings a week. It's completely unheard of. Yeah. When we've got organizations that are scratching around in the dirt for pipeline, why is the whole bunch of individuals? What is the connection between all these bunch of individuals that suddenly seem to be able to create lots and lots of meetings?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest challenges is for leaders, business leaders, to realize that other people, their potential customers, they don't want to have brochures and insight thrown in their face, but they are willing to have a conversation with someone if they look interesting and they look different. They look like a genuine, authentic person worth having a chat with.
Yeah, the days of throwing content at strangers, that was over like 10 years ago. I'm amazed that people said it's a legitimate marketing thing. Anyway, back to the data.
Yeah.
So what you've been measuring things like network size. So your network on LinkedIn, for example. Mm-hmm. So these are the people that you've connected to that could influence a sale or be part of a sale. You're also looking at follower size. So you could have more followers than connections, because if people are following you, what that means is that you're sharing interesting content or you've got an interesting point of view.
Yeah.
You're also measuring the number of pieces of content, and interestingly enough as well, the percentage of human content. So why are you measuring human content?
Yes, firstly, just to take a step back, it's important to understand the network size and the growth of that network, because one's network has a value. The size of it in the right place and how active that network is has a real commercial value. It's the same as our Black Book did years ago.
Yeah, I have a pile of business cards which I always reach for that are probably long out of date. Yeah. In the old days, you used to collect business cards, but now you connect electronically.
That's it. But yet still, it's not seen as a valuable measure within businesses, insanely. But yeah, back to the human posts. So we track how many posts each individual is doing on a weekly basis. And it's not necessarily the number, although it's important to have a certain number of pieces of content going out so that you're popping up in your target audience, aka your network's timeline. But it's really important that content is humanized. And so what I mean by that is it's, for example, as I do a sales TV podcast, and that goes out on LinkedIn. That got a few likes this week, but what got more likes, more engagement, more impressions was me in a picture backstage behind the scenes. So that's a human post about Alex and where I was.
I often tell people that if you post a picture of a brochure, you will get no engagement at all. If you post a picture of you holding the brochure, you will.
Yeah. And so the reason why we target ourselves to ensure that at least 50% of our content is humanized is because that's what gets the impressions. That's what gets the engagement. And when you get that engagement, that gives you the opportunity to begin a conversation with your target audience.
So what you're saying is that likes and comments on a piece of content gives you the opportunity to go and have a conversation with those people.
Yeah, it does. And then the next best measure, if you like, that we track religiously is the number of social networking conversations we can insert ourselves into. And out of everything that we track, I would say it's that one behavior that has the biggest influence on the number of calls that we get each week. And so this is, if you imagine a real life in-person networking experience or scenario, you'll perhaps there'll be a room, there'll be some drinks and some canapes, and you'll sort of work the room as a salesperson. You'll have an idea of who you want to talk to. You may have even done a bit of research on them so that you can have a more meaningful conversation with them. They might be busy already talking to someone else, but you'll have a little listen, maybe walk a bit closer without looking weird, and wait for the opportunity to drop a smart question or an intelligent comment into the conversation, so that you insert yourself into that conversation seamlessly and credibly. And it's exactly the same on social media, exactly the same. The difference is you can do it from the comfort of your own chair, your own office, as many times a day as you like. I guess the hardest thing is just identifying who you want to go and speak to and actually do the work.
So you've got some analytics on this, haven't you?
I do.
Can you show those?
Yeah, let me share my screen. Should be able to see that. Yeah, so this is a team of 4 following the methodology. This is what we call the year-to-date report.
So in terms of network growth, if we're starting from the left to go to the right,
yeah,
then so in it's let me, if I got that, in the last year you've increased your network by just about 8,000.
Yeah,
increased your followers by 12,680
combined.
You've done 808 posts on social media. 423 of those are humanized.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got about 800,000 impressions.
Yeah.
So
free paid media, as I call it.
Free paid media, yes. And your engagement in is what? So what? Talk me through engagement in, which is the 15,500.
Yeah, so that's the number of likes and comments that we've received on those 808 posts that we've made as a team this year.
You've asked for 7,858 chances to have a meeting or call, and you've had 788 calls.
Yeah.
Over the 10-month period.
Yeah. So the engagement in is important, because if you're, as we were talking about earlier, if you're connecting with purpose into the right organizations that you want to do business with, not necessarily just primary stakeholders, but primary, secondary, tertiary stakeholders, you're growing your visibility within that organization. And so when you get this much engagement in, so likes and comments on your content, it's highly likely that it's people or some of the people that you want to do business with. And it's at that moment you can then start to engage in that messaging exchange and then ask for the call. But we don't ask for the call straight away. We seek to build affinity, rapport via continued engagement. And it could be a couple of weeks, could be several weeks before we actually ask for the call. But before we ask for the call, it's important that we're tracking that engagement out. So combined, we've done nearly 9,000. We've inserted ourselves, as we call it, into almost 9,000 different social networking conversations throughout the year. And it's these things combined that when we ask for the call, we're getting 788 calls.
So if I recall, so you're getting, when you're doing cold outbound, for every 100 people that you contact, you will get a response from 10.06, so 10 people.
Yeah.
And then whenever you do any cold outbound, there's always a requirement to get some next step at that call. And you're getting a response of 34.27% to that next step.
Yeah, that's the annual average, or 10-month average. What we're looking at here is the leaderboard for those same numbers for Q3. So we can select whatever day.
So you've also got a board where you can take the data that you've got here and actually do some projections, haven't you?
We do. So now that we've got 10 months worth of data across different targeting strategies and a range of different sales experiences following this methodology, we believe this is solid benchmark data. So if we then start to project what the future might look like by following this methodology, we can say, I don't know, how big's the sales team? let's say it's a big sales team of 50 people, and the opportunity generation rate is equal to the call progression rate. So we know in terms of the sales team inputs, if all those 50 people did was follow what we just talked through, then that'll be 15,600 posts within a year. Nearly 8,000 of them humanized. That's 260,000 social networking conversations that they're inserting themselves into. As you recall, that's one of the biggest influences of building influence and the call rate. And that's requesting 182,000 calls. That will result in 6,454 calls. We know the call progression rate is 34%. When you're following this methodology, it is clear who you are, what you stand for, and what you do because of your buyer-centric profile and the behavior, the active behaviors that you've been doing on social media. Therefore, when you have a call, it's not a surprise what you do. And therefore, 34% of them will progress to a meaningful next step. And if 34% of those are progressing to a meaningful next step, and each qualifying as an opportunity, that's 2,200 opportunities. Now, we know that the industry close rate, according to Winning by Design, is 17% between SMB and enterprise. So let's assume your close rate is 17%. I've spoken to companies that have seen their close rate drop to 10% at this point in time. Let's assume it's 17% and the average order value is £100,000 or dollars, whichever currency you might use. So that team of 50 will generate £37 million worth of revenue within a 12-month period. So for me, what is bringing predictability back to pipeline generation, which has been missing for so many years, that's what businesses need to be focusing on. Now, what we might want to do, because not every company has 50 salespeople or 50 people that would follow this methodology. That's another thing I think we have to bear in mind. I do believe that the role of prospecting shouldn't just sit with the sales team. It should be a culture that is developed within an organization. But let's say you've got 5 enterprise salespeople focusing on a close rate of, let's say,
are you sticking with the close rate of 0.17?
Yeah. Okay. So here's the good question. What we found with people following a focused account sales strategy, the territory penetration rate has increased 15 times by following this approach. And the number of stakeholders that are engaged in each active account increases 6.4 times. So, my question is then, what do you think that would do to the close rate if you've built your influence across a wider range of stakeholders influencing the purchase decision? But let's just assume it's a small number from 17% to 20%. And that changes by £2 million. That's paid for the initiative and some on its own. But you can start to play around with this data so that you can get a really good idea of what this means to you and your organization. How big is your sales team? Do you operate a focused account approach or a volume account approach? And this works for anyone that wants to build relationships, because that's what this is about at scale, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, whether it's customer success, whether it's the leadership team looking to raise capital or raise funds. This methodology can be applied to any discipline within the organization.
Alex, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your journey and sharing your benchmarks data and your analytics.